Welcome back, Wanderers, to the Corner of Story and Game for our special Valentine's Day episode. Today, we embark on a heartfelt journey through romance in video games with our esteemed guest, Heidi McDonald. With over 12 years of experience in narrative design and game development, Heidi has certainly left her mark on the industry. Her career includes collaborations with IPs such as Star Trek and Love Island, and working with companies such as Pixelberry, Netflix, and Shell Games. Join us as we unravel the intricacies of love, connections, and creating relationships within digital realms. First of all, Heidi, thank you for joining me.
I'm glad to be here.
I was told you are the person to talk to about romance, and I'm going to have you back another time to talk about the other stuff that you specialize in, and especially empathy after seeing your GDC 2018 talk. But today we're here to talk about romance.
Awesome.
So before we get going, I like to ask, just to ground ourselves, can you tell me your journey into gaming, the game world, game writing, playing games? How'd you get here?
So I started playing games in 1979. And that year, that was the year that literally every other child in the class got an Atari 2600, except for my family, because we didn't have a whole lot of money. And so Christmas showed up, and we were just like, Peter Billingsley with the Red Ryder air gun. We wanted that Atari. It's like we did everything. And on Christmas morning, we came downstairs, and here's this huge box under the tree. And we're like, oh my God. And we opened it, and it was a Pong. And my dad is like, isn't this cool, kids? And we're like trying not to cry. And it's like, I jokingly say sometimes that that's what made me want to go into video games, because I was told, I was denied the ability to have the games that I wanted. And so that I wanted to make the games that I wanted. So I think that had something to do with it. But basically, when my youngest child went to kindergarten, I went to college, because I hadn't gone to that point, but I was 39, went to college, literally twice the age of all the freshmen in the class. And here I went to college. And for one class, we went to a creative career seminar where I heard a woman talk about her job as a video game designer. And I guess I knew on some level that people made video games, but I always just assumed that they were computer programmers who did that. Mm-hmm. And this lady was talking about what it was like to be a designer and a writer, and all the different careers that here are the different disciplines that are available to you. And my life instantly changed, because first of all, holy shit, that's a job, mm-hmm. And second of all, wait a minute, women do this job. And then third, oh my God, there's a company right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that makes games. I was obsessed, right? And it took a few months before I was courageous enough to approach them about an internship. And it just so happened that when I approached them, they were just starting pre-production on a narrative-heavy game, and their writer was already assigned to something else. So I tell people it was 80% luck and 20% pester, because I was just pleasantly persistent. But I am absolutely the edge case when it comes to, how did you get into games? It wasn't in a typical way at all, or at a typical time. I was 41 years old when I got hired into games at Shell Games in Pittsburgh. I'm 3 weeks older than Jesse Shell. So that was interesting, but I've been around in it for about 12 years now, almost 13. And I love it. It's awesome.
That's so cool. Is along the way on your journey, were there some biggest hits? Is there some moments that were really standing? Because I know you worked on some really nice titles. So do you want to just mention a couple of those that you had a chance to work on?
I worked with Love Island, the game. And one of the reasons I thought that it was a really special game, because the show is, very surface level and kind of guilty pleasure kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But the team at Fusebox Games did something a little bit different with it. They infused a level of humor and heart into it, and it was really a lot better of a game than it had a right to be. So when I saw that they had a listing to go write for that game, I was like, I want to write with that team, because they did something really special there, and I want to be part of it. So I got to work with them for a little while. I also got to work with Fogbank on Storyscape for a little while, a very little while, in fact, because the studio closed about 4 months after I got there, and that was sad.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to write on Star Trek Timelines, which was amazing because I got to write with some of my favorite Star Trek characters.
Nice.
And there have been a couple of titles that I really wish I could talk about, which would be career making if I were able to say, hey, I worked on but NDA, you're not allowed to say anything. But I worked with two very, very big franchises that I did my career best work on, and I was very proud of it. I'm hoping I'll be able to recycle some of that stuff in other places and other ways, but yeah.
That's how it goes sometimes, right? Okay, let's move into talking about romance. Now,
sure.
We're going to focus a little bit on narrative and narrative branching and narrative games, just because that's one of the strongest places to look at romance, and because there's kind of a growing trend in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start off with a hard one. There's a common conversation between the balance between allowing player agency and then locking down the narrative so that you have a more emotional, resonant experience. In romance specifically, what are some techniques or strategies? How do you incorporate romance into that branching narrative, still allowing agency, but still getting that payoff?
Okay, well, there are a couple things to keep in mind with it, right? First of all, you don't want to force romance on people. You always want them to opt in. And I think that's a mistake that some games make, where they force a romance on you, and it's like you can't progress unless you romance this character or whatever. I think it is always best when you allow players to opt in. So that's one. You want there to be lots of different kinds of romance so that people can play the game they prefer to play. Inclusion is something that's important, right? And you don't want to force straight people to play queer. You don't want to force queer people to play straight. There are some people who are asexual. You have all different kinds of people who romance in all kinds of different ways. And so you want to allow people to play the game that they want to play. So offer them lots of options. And then the way that I see story in a game, right, it's a 3-tiered thing. You've got the story of what's happening in the world. And then you've got the story of the relationship between the player character and the other characters. And that's pretty much where the romance mostly lives, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got the story, the individual story of the player character. Like, what story of your experiences are you building for yourself? And the key to it, I think, is hitting a sweet spot where the romance has its own player-directed arc that affects the story of the world, and it affects your individual journey. And it has to be in a way that all 3 tiers of the story still make sense. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, that involves a metric crap ton of sticky notes when you're plotting all of that out, because you want to give players choices that matter, and the game, the world, the characters all need to react to those choices. So keeping in mind the 3 different tiers of where story is happening and how the romance story is going to be interacting with and supporting the tiers both above and below.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So when you're working with that and you're embedding that narrative into the game for players to interact with and explore and discover, and those relationships are developing, how do you make them feel authentic? How do you make a real connection, even if the character on the other side has tentacle face? Just
yes, I played that one actually. I stumbled into that one completely by accident. Boy, was that a thing! And you folks playing Baldur's Gate 3 know exactly what we're talking about.
But how do you keep it feel real, even when it's fantasy?
So what I return to over and over is universal themes, right? These are concepts that every human being has experienced and is familiar with. We all have family drama. We've all experienced loss. We've all had to relate to people who are different from us in some way, if that's race, if that's economic class, religion, whatever it is. And I like to start from there because those are things that are going to resonate because we've all experienced them, right? And Some writers prefer to write a love interest whose sole job it is to just constantly tell the player how pretty and smart and awesome they are, with no conflict ever or any real effect on anything. And I mean, that is one kind of fantasy, and there's an audience for that, but there's also no depth to that. And I prefer depth. Depth to me hinges on vulnerability, and the characters have to find a place where they can be vulnerable with each other around what they share and how they're different around these universal themes.
How do you work that into the bigger story? I'm curious, I'm going off on a side tangent here. When you're working hard to make that authentic, how do you tie that into the bigger picture and keep the whole thing authentic?
It depends on what's going on in the world. You just have to keep very clear about who your love interests, who your NPCs are, right? What was their backstory? Where did they come from? How would they feel about this thing that's happening in the world? And just keep in mind what they are thinking about and how they're going to react and how they're going to feel. Like if you look at Dragon Age Origins, which anyone who knows me knows that I will talk about that game forever and ever because it's one of my very favorites. Dragon Age Origins had something in it that I really loved, and that was that you could make decisions in the game that would offend one of your companions so badly that the companion would be like, I'm out, and they'd leave, and they would never have anything to do with you in the game ever again. And, that's what I'm talking about. Is like you want to have these characters with their own value systems, like what's important to them, what do they care about, where have they been, where are they going, what do they live for, what would they die for? And just keeping those things in mind, you think to yourself, all right, well, how would Astarion feel if you decided to let this lead vampire stay alive? How's he going to feel about that? And then just what are the different ways that the player would justify doing something like that?
Right.
Well,
all right. You did mention a core concept when it comes to romance in games, period, whether it's live action role playing, whether it's tabletop, whether it's a video game, and that is consent. It's allowing people the choice whether or not they want to engage in the romance function of the game. So with that being said, are there some interesting techniques that you've seen, or are there clever ways of inviting people to those relationships that don't seem, over the top, chocolate and roses?
Just making sure that people have both an opt-in and an opt-out. It's like with Love Island, we made sure that no physical contact happened between the player and the player character unless the player very visibly wanted, like the player select, yes, I want this. And then the character will say something like, I can't wait to touch you too. Are you sure? Is this fine? So it's like we always wanted to allow for, in case the player hit that by mistake, they can still back out if they want to.
That's smart.
Yeah. And it might on the surface not make any sense to have a romance game where a person has the possibility of opting out every single time, but we have asexuals, and they may want to play that way. So that goes under the heading of offer as many options as you can so that people can, Warren Spector said something really fantastic one time in a talk that I saw of his, where he talked about the concept of co-authorship and how really great game narratives are ones where the narrative designers will offer the player enough of an array of choices where the player can craft and tell their own story the way they want to. And it is a kind of co-authorship because you're laying out this big buffet and then they get to pick and choose what parts they want to weave into their own experience. And because they are using your tools to build their narrative, it's kind of a really nice give and take that happens. And it really is a co-authorship. That when he said that, it really resonated with me a lot. And that's how I've tried to approach things.
That makes sense. I've heard various versions of that. I've never heard that talk, but like the whole idea of, as a game writer or designer, putting a story into the game and then allowing the player to discover it in their own way. But I like that idea. That's the difference between a novel and a game. Is a novel, here's the story. A game is, here's an activity and an experience, and you can discover different stories along the way or build your own with the tools we give you. that's why we play games.
I love sticking goofy little stuff in there that's several layers deep. That's one of the things that I love. And, you don't want to do too much of that because, budget, time constraints, whatever. But it's a good thing to keep in mind that not all of your players will see your content, but all of your content will be seen. Mm-hmm. And, when somebody finds that little tentacle Easter egg, they will never forget that as long as they live,
and friends.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was so funny. Holy crap, did I laugh at that?
Quite the moment.
Completely by mistake.
Yeah, sure.
My son doesn't believe me.
We do.
He's welcome to believe when he wants. That's all right.
Speaking of the storyline, the narrative that runs through a game, when it comes to a romance game, how do you ensure after they've followed the storyline, made their choices, get to the end, how do you ensure that the emotional payoff at the end of a romance storyline is satisfying?
Okay, so that's actually a really interesting question, because in my second romance and game survey that I, did talks about papers and all that kind of stuff, players that I surveyed cited lack of payoff as the number one annoyance in terms of why a game romance might fall short for them. And it's like, there are so many games where like you have sex with them or you marry them and then they don't talk to you anymore. That's like totally it. And so finding ways to continue to have conversation and choice after a consummation or a commitment and some kind of evolution is important. But I mean, I'm going to invoke Baldur's Gate 3 again. We saw that like people were crying bloody murder that they didn't get some kind of final moment with their love interest after the big story had ended, but before the game ends. And I think that's just really important, is some kind of final moment with your love interest where they reminisce with you about everything you've been through together, what the journey has meant to them, how it has changed them, how you two of you changed the world. And then you can talk about where is the romance likely to go for these characters after the game is over with. And like, I was just so deeply happy that Larian went back in and added that, because it is really, really important. And I'm just the biggest nerd for their game. So any Larian people who are gonna participate in this show, hats off. Absolutely. I will never stop playing.
That sparks something interesting in my brain I just want to talk about for 1 second. Having been married for a couple decades now, I won't age me and my wife, but there's that romance part leading up to, the relationship becoming found, whether you get married or you move in or whatever that moment. Mm-hmm. Honestly, that's fiery and passionate and hot, but it's the next 20 years that make an interesting story. It's the development of an actual love and not just the chemicals at the beginning. That would be a much better game. How do you manage 20 years of children?
I completely agree with you. I think that is absolutely underrepresented, and I think there's a world of opportunity in that. One of the best television shows that I saw in recent years was Taylor Sheridan's 1888, because it took this couple, Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, who've been married that long in real life, mm-hmm. and then put them in the situation where they're playing a couple that's been married for that long, and like watching them have to negotiate stuff that life throws at them when they might not 100% agree on the way to handle things, or, something changes in one person's value system that might not change in another person's value system. And like, how do you negotiate? There is power in that. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I would love to see more of that and more emphasis put on stories with healthy relationships who have been together for many, many years. Absolutely an area of opportunity.
And I would say from a narrative point of view, the emotional well you could tap into there, like the experiences you could share that will make people cry or reach out or feel supported, or like there's so much there. But yeah.
Absolutely. No, agree. Absolutely agree.
There's been a growing trend, and I don't know if you've seen this, and maybe this is my bias based on what I've been doing lately, but I've seen more and more mention of virtual novels, visual novels, narrative only, choose your own adventures in a digital form, Twine games, that kind of thing. Have you A, have you seen this? And B, what do you think that lends to the romance space? How can those visual novels influence the landscape of romance video games?
Now, when I talk about this, I'm not talking about the indie space. I'm talking about the mobile space where a lot of these games are, right? This is something of a soapbox question for me, so there you go. But
all yours.
I am seeing a trend with these kind of games that I don't really like, and it's being driven by unethical monetization and an over-reliance on data and popularity chasing. And I just believe that it ought to be okay for a game to be for a very loyal niche audience instead of twisting into pretzels to appeal to everyone so hard that you end up appealing to no one. And we see consent minimized or not there. We see bad human behavior being glorified in the name of drama or stickiness. We see sex inserted into situations where it doesn't make any sense because of monetization requirements, pushy characters, all those kinds of things. And I do think that there's an audience for that. I mean, numbers show that there is an audience for it. But I believe, and this is a hill that I will die on, I believe that maybe even literally with things being what they are in the games industry. But I do believe that there's a bigger audience for folks who want depth and good storytelling and agency. And I think the opportunity with narrative designers right now rests with getting back to that kind of depth and agency instead of kiss him for 20 diamonds or punch him in the face. And surface level situations where all of the love interests are essentially interchangeable. Sorry. And soapbox. It's a thing that bugs me.
I'm not in the space as much, so I don't see it, but from that glance, I would 100% agree with you. Mobile game space in on its own kind of has that quick reaction to algorithms and metrics and pushed far more by marketing and business decisions as opposed to an art and a craft. Not all of them. I've seen some amazing mobile games, do not get me wrong. I was coming at the question from the point of view of that indie Twine game space, right? The stuff you'll discover on itch.io, the interesting experiments that are being done in that space of visual novels. But I think that's where it might come from, like with the amount of loose talent that we have in narrative design right now. Holy crap. That's the opportunity. People who want to get back to telling these kinds of deeper stories, maybe that's where it comes from. Maybe we see somebody come up with this sweeping, fantastical love story, and then somebody sees her, plays it, and goes, "Oh my God, this needs to be a bigger game. How can we build that? How do we build it out? How do we build around it?" That might be where it comes from. Oh, I'd love to see that.
Me too.
Okay, so you mentioned that you did some research of your own and you did a survey. Are there other ways that you can gather feedback when you're approaching a romantic storyline? How do you gather the information you need to build it? And then how do you test the narrative? How do you test and iterate on an experience like that?
Well, when we were at Fusebox, what we used to do is come up with character concepts and come up with romance storylines and focus group it. Like, of these love interests, which one would you pursue, kind of thing. In my research, like the first romance survey that I ever did, what I did was, when you're going on Match.com, they ask you to, are you this adjective or are you that adjective? Like two adjectives that are conflicting with each other. And they ask you, which of these would you use to describe yourself? So what I did is I went on the Match.com questionnaire. I stole each and every one of their adjectives. And then for my survey, I said, would you describe yourself as a person this way? Yes or no? Would you describe your character who you play this way? Yes or no? Would you date a person like this? Yes or no? Will you romance a character who is like this? Yes or no? And what I ended up finding out was like basically a list of adjectives that people were really interested in as far as who they want to romance in the game. And then when you break that out even further by gender, it got even more interesting at that point. Like, for instance, women tend to play characters who they are most like, but they will experiment wildly. It's like, yes, I'll have sex with a dwarf. Why not? Right? But men, on the other hand, will be very conservative with their romancing. They will date in the game somebody who they would date in real life, but they will experiment wildly with their own identity. They want to be bigger, stronger, meaner, more powerful, So there's a real difference in how they romance and why they romance, right? And so that was kind of interesting. And so when you look at who the men were wanting to romance, it came down to somebody who is kind, somebody who is strong and can handle their own stuff. The kinds of things that you might hear these guys say in a personal ad that they were writing for themselves in real life.
Right.
Women, on the other hand, they're like, I want Han Solo, I want a funny guy. I want a rogue. I want, they're all over the place. They want to see who's available for them to romance. They want to romance everyone who's out there. Give it a try. Romance a different gender. Why not? It's an experiment. It's fun. So that was something that I noticed, and that was one thing that I learned how to lean on as far as how to test it. I actually saw this incredible GDC talk back in 2012. Changed my life thoroughly. BioWare guy named Dave Feltham. His talk was called Emotional Journey, BioWare's Methods to Bring Narrative into Levels. And what they talked about was how BioWare tests to understand whether its cinematics are hitting the right level of emotional engagement, right? And they do, believe it or not, and this was after I'd already done my survey, they write a list of adjectives down. So it all comes down to adjectives, right? Gonna unpack my adjectives. Only a few of us will understand that song. But they write down the adjectives, which are the emotional responses that they are hoping that players will have, right? Then they assign an emotional intensity scale to specific points in the cinematic, and they decide where on the scale they think, how intense do I think this is? How intense do I want it to be? And then they play the cinematic for the focus group, and they have the focus group supply their own adjectives and ask them to rate the emotional intensity of those same specific points, right? And then compare the answers. So then BioWare is able to see, what do you need to turn up? What do you need to turn down? And what do you change in terms of the emotions that are being telegraphed and how you're making the player feel in that moment? And I absolutely recommend that approach. I totally stole it. I've been using it for years.
That's so cool. My wife's a psychology major, and so there's psychology books kicking around the house. So I've been reading them for 20 plus years now. And what you're dipping very heavily into the world of psychology and the studies they do, and personality typing. Although we don't trust personality typing anymore, but has anybody in the game space done borrowed tools from the psychology world to do typing and figure out where are the resonance points and what is triggering this?
Actually, that is our whole other topic that we were saying we might do another whole show on, because that's what seriously, that's what I spent 3 years doing with iThrive, because I was the only game person on a team of social psychologists. So yes, there is a system like that, and it'd probably be too much in the weeds for this show to get into, how we went about things. But yes,
we're going to come back.
The answer to your question is yes.
Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to talk about psychology and empathy and gamification for social improvement, and that's another area I'm very interested in. And if we start nerding out on that, we'll be here for way too long.
I agree.
It's Valentine's Day. We're supposed to be happy and love and hearts. Okay. Mechanics. From a design point of view, Have you ever seen any interesting mechanics that can, pull people into those relationships, create the feeling of romance, tell a romantic story that are not narrative, but more from a mechanic point of view? And if not, so be it, but I'm curious.
Well, I actually want to talk a little bit about something that I did that didn't make it to the public because it felt like a really important discovery. And I hope I get to use this method again someday because it felt like I might have been onto something. Mm-hmm. I was working on a Regency game for a little bit. And with that one, I had to do a lot of thinking about, okay, how am I going to approach this? Because I want it to be a little bit different than what we've seen before. I want to be like new and special about it. And how do I do that? And so I thought about it, one of those times where you just kind of walk away for a day or so and just let your brain churn and trying to figure it out. I had this epiphany that popular Regency stories are all built around the society calendar because life back then was also built around the society calendar. So I built this entire game narrative by starting with the actual society calendar of 1817. And for each event on the list, I made big lists of what do people who go to this event expect to have happen here? How and why could one utterly disrupt this event? And what would reactions be? How would people react to a disruption in this situation, right? So I had like this calendar of here are the places people are going to go in this order. Here are the range of things we might expect to see happen in these places. And then I used that as the beginning framework because usually it's like you have your story and you think about where could it take place. But I started with the where could it take place, right? And I used that as a framework to think about how each different character is going to conduct themselves and drive what's happening instead of just reacting to it. And that's how the main narrative for that emerged. And I was even putting together a GDC talk about it. Regency narratives built outward from society calendars, but then the game got canceled.
That's a really cool idea.
Sad face. And I think that would only work in the context of like historical, if you're doing a historical fiction romance that way. I mean, you could also do it in like a Star Wars or a Star Trek, something with like 50 years worth of lore with established events in the canon. You could approach it that way inside of an IP, potentially. But my thinking was all around building around events and using the events as the framework instead of you thinking about that in a secondary way. I thought about it in the primary way, and that's
clever.
It brought things to a pretty interesting place. And I hope I get to implement that sometime.
You could do it with like Forgotten Realms. Like it's been around long enough, and there's enough us super nerds. We know when yours is and when the moon's line, and but that makes like Stardew Valley has romance tied to events, but it's a very secondary mechanic that's happening in the background. But if you give on a birthday, give a present, it gives you more romance, blah blah blah. So
I really am curious to see what 1.6 is going to do with romance. If Eric decides to make that stuff more robust or add characters, I want to see if he adds anything to that. I am not somebody who is the greatest fan of give you enough cookies and if I give her enough cookies, she'll marry me.
Yeah.
I thought that, and here we are back at Dragon Age Origins again, but I thought Dragon Age Origins, they did that with gifts, right? You could fast track the affection meter with gifts, but they did it in a fun way where if you deliberately give the wrong gift to the wrong person, some of the reactions you get are hilarious.
Yeah, they're worth it just for the reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, like you find a pair, like the dog will bring you, or you will find in the world a pair of soiled undergarments, right? And of course you're supposed to give those to the dog, right? It's obvious you're supposed to give them to the dog. I gave them to Sten. and he loved them.
That's great. Just causing chaos.
Yeah. I'm exactly that player. I am the player who will do everything to break the game. I mean, that Cazador battle in BG3, this was before they went in and they fixed that. I cheesed that battle in 2 moves.
What?
I cheesed the battle because you have this thing called a void bulb that will just draw everything to where it is. I waited until Cazador got close enough to an edge. I threw the void bulb at the edge and sent him right over the edge. I cheesed it in 2 moves. And they went back in and they're like, wait a minute, we need Cazador to remember that he can fly. I was like, oh. Because that was funny. Oh, my God. I was cackling so loud. My guy came in here. He's like, what is going on with you, you hyena? And I'm like, you don't understand what I just did. It was so funny. It's like, boop, there he went. Holy crap, that worked.
I can't believe they fixed it, though. They are well known for when players or playtesters find things that are kind of seem like broken or not supposed to be there. They'll figure out ways to work it in so that it becomes part of the narrative, part of the game. So but I mean, he remembered he could fly, I guess, is still part of the narrative. They didn't put an item or something.
So I am endorsed by a few different people, like legitimately endorsed for cheese on LinkedIn. It's like anyone who knows me knows how much I adore cheese. It's a thing. I just have this thing about cheese. And so it should surprise no one, and it should not surprise Larian that I go in there wanting to cheese the game. I actually, my first playthrough, every single wheel and slice of cheese that I found in the whole game, I kept it in my inventory and I didn't spend, just because I wanted to be carrying around all the cheese. And I might have used all the other food, but I kept the cheese. I cheese everything. That's just what I do.
Gotta be known for something, right?
I'm a goofball.
You're an adorable goofball.
Oh, thank you.
It's Valentine's Day.
Aw. That's probably the closest thing to Valentine we'll get. I don't know. No, here, I live in the spooky part of North Carolina, which is great because it's like the media moment that we're having right now with folk horror and like cryptids and spooky shit.
Yeah.
I now live in the middle of where all that stuff exists or is alleged to exist. And I'm not going to lie, I have seen things in these parts that are not to be explained. I don't understand what was really going on. Maybe I never will. Maybe it was just my imagination, don't know. But I live in the spooky part of North Carolina. And one of the things we have here is a restaurant called Bojangles. Bojangles makes Valentine's Day biscuits. So it's like a regular biscuit, your chicken biscuit, but they make it in the shape of a heart. So that's like a little Valentine treat that I look forward to every year in the middle of North Carolina, is going to Bojangles and getting my little heart-shaped biscuit. Yeah. My needs are simple.
That sounds still amazing. I'm there. I'm curious that this has nothing to do with anything, but I'm Canadian, so I don't know American geography very well. Is that like the same region as like the Appalachian or
Yes, actually, Appalachia does run through the western side of North Carolina. The Smoky Mountains are on the western side of North Carolina into Tennessee. I live in the middle of North Carolina. So it's like we've got beach 3 hours this way. And of course, there's a lot of ghost lore coming out of the beach because that was piracy central back in the 1600s. We had Blackbeard taken down right off Ocracoke Island. It's a thing. Lots of lore, lots of history if you're into pirates. They do ghost walks and stuff like that. And then you've got like farmlands and forests. And then, of course, out west, you got the mountains. And of course, in those mountains, there's a lot of stuff that's rumored to live there. Don't know, can't say. It's a lot of fun to speculate, though.
So I'm hearing you want to do Valentine's episode and Halloween episode.
Yeah. Oh my God. As long as you mean like Halloween in a kind of cozy way, because believe it or not, this is like the biggest contradiction. I realize that Halloween is my favorite thing, but I don't like horror. Like, you won't see me playing Silent Hill or Five Nights at Freddy's. I just don't do it.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you live that close to the real thing, you don't need the games.
That's right. That's right. Because like crazy crap happens here all the time. It's kind of cool.
Do you listen to the podcast Old Gods of
Absolutely.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. 10/10 can recommend.
Yeah. I recommend it all the time. All the time. I drop plugs here and there. Okay, let's pull back to romance. It's Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah, that.
We're actually getting pretty close to being done here. So why don't we take a quick put on the crystal ball and take a look ahead? What do you envision for the future of romance in video games?
I'm a little worried about it right now, to be honest, because we've got AI out there now. And the good news for players is that they're going to be able to craft exactly the experience that they want as they play. And that raises a whole bunch of questions that I'm not going to get into. But the bad news is one wonders whether that kind of interaction is going to become preferable to the real thing. And of course, whether people like me will have jobs anymore. Like on social media, you read all the time about how hard dating is, right? And in Japan, they're experiencing a birth rate crisis. And there's studies and articles about this, right? People aren't having sex. They're not marrying because they're deciding that it's just not worth it. And so in a case where there's real social problems associated with the real world lack of sex and romance, it's like, are games going to exacerbate the problem, or are they going to help? Are they going to satisfy something on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that everyone needs? Are they going to teach people how to function in a relationship? I can't answer that. Is AI going to shove me and my friends out the door at some point? I can't answer that either. But, that kind of stuff keeps me up at night. And I guess where I'd like it to go is a world where I can just still make a living telling stories for and with an audience who appreciates them. So that's really all I wanted at this point. I don't need to work at a AAA studio. If they want to hire me, that's totally okay. But, I think what I really want to do is just keep telling stories for and with an audience who enjoys them.
I like that. And I guess to give it a positive note, like we said earlier, that maybe there'll be an explosion of indie stuff. Maybe people will start to explore narrative form as an art form on their own, and it'll become something more.
I think they absolutely are going to, because we don't know how much longer this chaos is going to last. But the wonderful thing is what's going to come from that chaos, right? Because people need to build things for their portfolios. They're going to turn their attention to these long neglected projects that they've had for a while. And I think we're going to see wonderful games and studios coming out of this. And I can't wait for it.
Nice. I like that. Okay, we have come to the question that lives at the heart of this podcast, and that is, in my opinion, there's a magical space where stories and games, writers, players, actors, voice actors, musicians, all these people meet, and they can just hang out around the fire, swap stories, sing Kumbaya, hold hands. What makes this space magical? In your opinion, what is the thread that holds us all together?
Universal themes. Because people are going to consume different media for different reasons, right? They want escape, they want catharsis, they want to have their mind challenged or expanded somehow. But like the universal things are the things that people relate to no matter why they're showing up for the media that they're consuming. So I have to say universal themes are that thread.
Amen. Okay, the follow-up question I like to ask to that, though, is why are stories important? And more importantly, why are stories important to you?
Well, I think stories are important because they're a reference point for our humanity. They connect us, right? You can recognize yourself and people you love in stories. When people you love aren't here anymore, it's the stories that keep those people with us. and you can be inspired. You can learn. You can be like, girl, I am not ever going to act like that one, that character or whatever. I really loved watching Succession for that reason. It's like a whole bunch of terrible people. Like, oh my God, I could never do that. And storytellers are important because we have the ability to find humor, the heart, the honesty, the bravery in these simplest of circumstances. And like, I can't do that yet. We can. And we're always going to be able to do that because it's about our humanity.
I like it. Okay. Before we head out the door, I like to do what I call the quick fire questions. So these are just top of the mind. Just hit me with it. What are you currently playing?
Baldur's Gate 3 and Coral Island.
There you go. An unexpected one and one we are all playing.
Yeah.
What are you currently reading? What's on the nightstand right now?
Meeting in the Devil's House by my good friend Richard Dansky. It's a collection of short, spooky stories.
I'm adding that to my list right now.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
What is the best?
I have actually had to I've had to ration those stories. I can't binge them. I have to like read one and then take a break and then read another one and take a break.
Is it trying to stretch it out, or is it because you don't like scary stuff?
It's because I don't like scary stuff, but I love his book because he's a friend of mine. It's like you want to support your friend's books, right? And he writes in a genre that I don't typically read, but this book of his came out. And it's like, it's really good and it's really well done. And so I just have to kind of read the story and just kind of churn on it for a while and then be ready to read another one. So
nice. What's the best advice you've ever received? And that could be career advice or it could be life advice.
Choose your battles wisely.
That's a good one. Perfect. I have two more. I'm adding an extra one. So here's the extra one that I just added right now.
Okay.
What's your favorite game romance? So who did you romance in Baldur's Gate 3 maybe?
Well, I went with Karlach. Later on when I met Halsin, I was like, I would have picked Halsin, but you can't pick him until halfway through the game. So my next playthrough definitely going to be Halsin, but Karlach, holy crap, that was chef's kiss good. For any you Larian folks, man, that was amazing. Kudos all around.
If you could host a game session, this could be a tabletop role-playing, board games, playing cards, playing video games, with any 4 people, living or dead, from any point in history, who would they be and what would you play?
Okay, I'm going to go with D&D 3E, and I'm going to pick David Tennant, Felicia Day, Betty White, and my 24-year-old son, Simon, who died a couple years ago. Because he was really good at D&D. He was able to do the voices and everything. And like, I would give just about anything for one more game with him. And I'm sorry, that's still pretty close to the surface for me. But when you talk about living or dead, he is at the top of my list always.
Thank you for sharing that. And that would be an incredible game.
It'd be fun. Man, Betty White would be so raunchy, hysterical. Just seeing the look on David Tennant's face reacting to her, man. Yeah.
So much energy. That'd be great. Oh, yeah. Before we head out the door here, is there any projects, anything you got going on you want to just boost or mention? Anything you want to put out there?
Well, so I'm working on 3 different novels right now, and I'm just kind of waiting to see which one wins. And in the meantime, if people want to browbeat me about finishing my shit, which is my way of saying, please browbeat me about finishing my shit, find me on Blue Sky. I am H McD on Blue Sky. If anyone wants to kick around, that's where I typically go to just hang out, talk to people, meet people, be goofy, right? And that would be the place where like, hey, are you writing on your book right now? Because like I said, 3 of them, and I don't know which one's going to win.
Gotcha.
Let's see.
Hey, Heidi. Finish your shit.
Yeah, all 3 of them are about 30% right now. So I gotta do some things.
So if you had done one, it would be almost done then.
That's right. But I'm never doing just one thing at a time. You know, if I'm watching TV, if I'm binging a TV series, I'm binging 3 at once and I'm going between them. If I'm reading a book, I'm reading 3 at once and I'm going between them. It's always 3 at a time.
Same way. All right. Well, it is time to close up shop, so I would love to give you the final word. You got a little bit of wisdom or something raunchy you want to say right at the end of our Valentine's Day special?
Not raunchy, but maybe a little sentimental. I lost a really important friend in games earlier this week. Her name was Laura Lynn McWilliams, and I would encourage everybody to read about her life because she was amazing, right? Anyway, when she passed away on Monday, the thing that brought me the most comfort was realizing that I was really glad that I'd taken the time to tell her at what point what I think of her, right? So I guess what I want to leave people with is tell your people why they matter. Tell them they matter. Tell them why. Say the things. Don't be afraid to say them, and don't wait for the day that you're supposed to do it, like Valentine's Day. I mean, do it on Valentine's Day, but don't wait for Valentine's Day, because like games and stories and romance and all of that, you peel all of that away, and what it's really about is our connections with other people. So say the things. Just say the things.
Well, with that, it is time to close up shop and send the couples on their way. Thank you for joining in, and a special thank you to Heidi for sitting down and sharing her expertise in video games and romance. Be sure to come back for the next episode when I sit down with Nick Sampson from Epic Realms. As always, if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe a review, tell your party, and hey, hit that subscribe spell on the way out. May your stories be rich, your games immersive, and your heart always full. Stay safe out there, Wanderer, and remember, your chair will be waiting for you here at the corner of Story and Game.